All right. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to session two of day two of our summit on May 24th. We've got Simmer Jolie from Nevada. She will be talking about domestic violence and colorism in South Asian communities, specific issues that really do affect that community, especially. And we're so excited to have her. If she would want to quickly go over what she plans to talk to us about today, and all of that. We're really excited to hear. Thank you guys.
Yeah, so we'll just be having some conversations about like first we'll talk about like kind of colorism and like the different ways you can see it in like the South Asian community, even in the West. And then we'll kind of pivot to the high prevalence of domestic violence among South Asian women also in the West. And then can you see my presentation?
Yep.
All right. Um, so yeah, so the first thing I kind of wanted to start the session with was just kind of like opening this up for discussion. And the question just what like messages did you hear growing up about, dark skin and who was the one saying them, like saying that?
I can play guinea pig if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for me, I'm definitely, I guess I'm from Pakistan, so it's slightly different. I guess I feel it's not as like I think it's entrenched, but not as much as like the Fair and Lovely ads in India are for sure. Um, I would say that my mom was definitely the first person who said something about how, oh, look, you're so tan. You were outside for so long. You should put like tomato paste here or like try this thing and like maybe you'll get lighter or something like that. And obviously, it's weird because it really depends on the person. Like some people go up to me and they're like, girl, why are you so light? And then there's other people who are like, wow, you're so dark. And I'm like, it's a matter of relevance or like I guess relative deprivation, if that makes sense. Like if you're considered more darker skinned, you see other people as like different. But it's a whole mess, I feel like in general. But it's not as entrenched in my family, but unfortunately I feel like it is for other people, which sucks. So,
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Does anyone else want to share? Okay, oh, wait, Ishan, did you want to speak or? Okay, I'll go ahead.
Oops,
Um,
sorry. I was trying
oh,
to find the button. Sorry about that. So, really, messages about dark skin. I come from India, and so just south of a big desert. And so, obviously, being hot, a lot of us have darker skin. We have, in my state especially, it's truly varied between, some people, it really just comes down to genetics rather than like ethnically, like this group of people have darker skin or anything. But so in my area, I mean, lighter skin, I think in South Asia is seen more like as a beauty standard. So, I mean, other than putting on sunscreen, I didn't really hear anything about dark skin growing up, but definitely like I saw racism in school with darker skin growing up in a red area of North Carolina. I grew up here in my entire life, and while I didn't experience racism just about dark skin specifically, I saw many different groups of people, and not just ANHPI people, like oftentimes black people or even white people being bullied for being too light skinned. So I saw stuff like that. But other than that, you know, I think I grew up hearing that like darker skin wasn't like favorable or attractive. And it wasn't like I didn't hear it in my family or anything, but that's just something I heard growing up here in North Carolina.
yeah, so I'll also just kind of share like my perspective as well. So, I'm actually a twin, so I have a twin sister, and and like so like growing up, like she has I would say she has like a like lighter undertone, so she has like a little lighter skin than mine. And like growing up, not necessarily obviously from my family, but there were like kind of comments like oh you should stop spending time in the sun, right? Like oh you need to do whatever she's doing because like there was this kind of like definitely like from the community I was with was that like the lighter you could get your skin was probably for the better. And honestly, like that's like fairly common, I would say. I think that a huge part about colorism that like it's not just kind of like this explicit like prejudice. It's literally just like in the phrases kind of surrounding the way you talk. So like some phrases you may have heard was like is like, in the South, if you grew up in a South Asian community or like, were heavily around one, then you might have heard like stay out of the sun or no one's gonna marry you. You're pretty for a dark-skinned girl. He is so fair, so he must be from a good family. And these type of comments just kind of reflect like attitudes and cultural meanings assigned to skin color in the South Asian community. For many South Asians, lighter brown skin tones are associated with like, things like attractiveness, goodness, power, status, and competence. Versus like in comparison, for like a lot of like people, they think darker brown skin tones are associated with like things like badness, lower class and caste, lower intelligence, and like a lack of beauty. And so this form of skin tone prejudice within the South Asian community and then the resulting discrimination that occurs, that's kind of what colorism is. Uh, I guess the formal definition from Dr. Sarah Webb, a colorism expert, she says it's the social marginalization and systemic oppression of people with darker skin tones and the privileging of people with lighter skin tones. And then the next, kind of before we go further, the other question I wanted to ask was, like, how have conversations about skin tone shaped your self-image or the way you see others in your community? And this is just open to everyone, so just go ahead and unmute.
I can go for it. I would say that for me, I definitely have had conversations about skin tone. They haven't shaped me particularly. I do feel like people have been more have an emphasis on like how may I say this? Like skin imperfections. Like for example, discoloration under the eyes or above the lips. Where people are like, oh my gosh, you have to get color corrector. Oh my gosh, you have to put concealer on that. Oh my gosh, that looks so dirty. And then anything that makes you look darker almost is like demonized. Like for example, hair, if that makes sense. Like obviously arm hair makes your skin look like slightly darker than it actually is. And then it also like creates like I guess contrast to your actual skin. So it's like a whole thing where people are very obsessed with removing their hair and having this like smooth sheen look, glowy look, whatever it is. And the idea of like hair and then also pockmarked skin or discolored skin interrupts with that, as well as like just discussions around skin tone in general. But I feel like that's just like a slight tangent to what you meant. But I feel like it may be relevant, especially that's how I've seen skin tone for the most part.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Well, if there's like no one else, I'll just kind of move on then from this question. But yeah, I guess kind of basically is and like the basically kind of the prejudice or discrimination that surrounds like your skin color. Like it can affect how you feel about yourself. And I think that really moves at colorism. It's not just kind of this like really bad and honestly even ridiculous way of thinking, but there are kind of tangible effects to like how kind of someone might see themselves and that's also really important. The other thing is that colorism can also create kind of divisions within the South Asian community, but also divisions amongst like other racially marginalized communities, because essentially it's just promoting like anti-Blackness attitudes. And that just kind of creates more obstacles to changing socio-political systems. Um, so South Asian beauty ideals are often taught kind of directly or indirectly to children by family, relatives, friends, aunts, uncles. And if you're kind of thinking about colorism in your family as something that's explicitly taught or said, more often than not, that really isn't the case at all. So, but there are kind of some like examples. So, for example, um, like if you're being policed about avoiding sun exposure, so like that's being told to stay out of the sun, to stay indoors, right? Like cover your body with clothing and clothing because like if you don't, there really is a lot of disapproval or criticism that you could be kind of met with. Like for example, like I like know a family in California, and even if it's like a sunny day, they will like walk around with umbrellas because they don't want to get like tanner, right? Because the idea is that like if you get tan, then like that's bad, or like it's gonna like ruin your like complexion or something like that. So like they're definitely like I have definitely seen that like, sun exposure is not seen as a good thing. The other thing is sort of, I guess, more like explicit and implicit examples of people with lighter complexions being favored. So, if you're like, for example, amongst your own family, right, members with like lighter skin tones might have more like preferential treatment, while family members with darker skin tones might like be met with more punitive behaviors. So like definitely kind of, I guess, observing that can like also be a huge part of like where you might get those kind of like get that ideology from. There's also this more kind of use like language use and nonverbal cues that favor lighter brown skin. So like I guess kind of the type of people that positive labels versus negative labels are being associated with. There's also certain body language, maybe like when referring to someone with a fairer complexion versus someone with a darker complexion, there might be like it might be just kind of like an expression of like, oh, that's not good versus like, maybe like a head nod to approve, like to kind of show like approval, right? When talking about people with fair complexions. It's really interesting. I actually I read this paper that said that it's even kind of in like just the way people might use the word like kind of darker skinned or black. Um, like the tone they might say that in reference to someone's skin tone, that might be more like kind of condescending or like with a more pitiful tone than the way like South Asian people might refer to people with like lighter complexions. So there's all of these like sort of things that you might not even realize that play a huge role in creating these like kind of skin color stereotypes in the South Asian community. The other thing is obviously the normalization of like whitening creams. Like I think Ankita, you mentioned it, like Fair and Lovely is really big, especially like I would say in India it's pretty like it's fairly common. Like I know a lot of people who use it. Um and it's really weird because it's one of those things that like if you tell people that you're using like a skin whitening cream, they wouldn't even think that like it's like they wouldn't think of it as something that's like weird or bad. They'll actually think it's like good, right? Like you're taking an effort to kind of look more quote unquote like beautiful, right? By like lightening your skin tone, while actually downplaying the negative health effects associated with kind of the bleach and chemicals in those products. The other thing is obviously like if you have family members who are the same skin tone as you and they're using those products, then it almost kind of seems like it's something that you should do, right? Or like it's sort of just like a fact of life. Um, the other thing is obviously like beyond kind of our home, it's also like some socio-political systems that play a role in the biases we have. So, like skin color stereotypes in the South Asian community have been rooted in a long history of kind of casteism and colonialism. And these stereotypes can be even more pronounced for South Asians living in countries that still uphold a racial hierarchy to a degree. So, like in the United States, for example, Shake 2017 finds that because white supremacy is so deeply ingrained in socio-political systems, South Asians in the United States experience discrimination in an unpredictable manner because of, I guess, being kind of racially ambiguous, right? Because the range of brown skin tones can make it difficult for people to identify with their racial background. And as a result, South Asians can experience the repercussions of like a range of racial and ethnic stereotypes, depending on, whether someone assumes you're like a model minority or like a kind of, I guess, like a criminal, right? Solely based on your skin color and facial features. Um, and because of this, like you'll see, like in efforts to protect themselves from being negatively stereotyped, a lot of South Asians, particularly women, will have more pressure, right, to kind of avoid the sun or use those skin lightening creams, especially if they've received positive reinforcement for doing so. The other thing is pop culture and media that kind of perpetuate these skin color biases. And that's kind of could be either by villainizing darker skin tones and idolizing lighter skin tones, or also just kind of lacking representation of those darker skin tones. Um, so like this was like an example of Fair and Lovely, which is like a whitening cream. And this, like, I remember growing up because like I used to watch a lot of like Indian channels. This, like, I remember this ad very well. Like, it's basically it's almost always the same concept, which is the idea that they're like the model is like darker skinned in the beginning, and then she uses the product, and then she becomes paler, which is like, she's also just become beautiful, like more beautiful. And it's kind of like, even like just with honestly the name of the company, right? Like Fair and Lovely. It's this idea that like in order to be like lovely, you'd have to be fair, or like that fair is lovely. And like honestly, like I would say like there's a lot like wrong with this like kind of like honestly like company. And obviously it is a whitening cream that is actually very like the chemicals they use is very hurtful. But like because this is so like kind of ingrained in like the pop culture, like it's not even like you wouldn't like a lot of people wouldn't consider it super off-putting or odd like for the prevalence of these products. The other thing is also sort of Bollywood movies, right? And honestly even kind of popular Netflix shows like Indian matchmaking. So like for example, in Indian matchmaking, there is an emphasis on skin color on the show, right? So like they kind of like one of the criteria for marriageability that a lot of people would mention is like having a fair complexion, right? And then obviously like in Bollywood movies, like here's kind of like something you might not consider, right? So like this is from a movie where like this character is someone who's like a lower class individual. And then for reference, this is like the actual actor who played who played this character. And like you can clearly tell that like the actor has like, like painted his face a darker color to show this. And this isn't like really unique. Whenever like Bollywood wants to show people who are like working class, lower caste, or minorities, they will typically go to like not even really cast people who are darker skin tone. They will paint people's faces a darker skin tone to represent that. So that's like another example. So like I guess the other thing is, right, like what can we do and how do we move forward? And I definitely think it's important to remember that this is a social problem, and the way you kind of should go about it is by addressing it. And I would say like the first thing is just kind of call people out, because there's a lot of like I think sometimes it's just very normalized to like make that comment and to say that thing. And most people don't even really realize what exactly they're saying and what the kind of connotations are. It's just very like, it's very common to say they've heard it a lot. And so when you see people in your family or in your kind of community saying things that are colorist, you honestly should just stop them and kind of ask what they mean by that. And like I would definitely say like maybe don't go like entirely with like the intent to shame them, but definitely like make sure they understand what they're saying. And you can even make like I think an offhand comment just kind of highlighting the ridiculousness of it all. Because you have to understand that like a lot of people, I think especially like a lot of older people, are kind of conditioned to think a certain way about lighter skin tones versus darker skin tones. And pointing that out, I think, can be very helpful. The other thing is that it's important to like understand that we all have preconceived notions about skin color, but we might not be aware of our own biases for like a variety of reasons, right? Um, and I think it's like I think a lot of people like sometimes it kind of feels uncomfortable to think that like skin color has something to do with how like others are treating you or even how you're treating others. But definitely like I would say like try to interrogate your own biases, right? Like um like see like how much like are you putting emphasis on like something like skin color. And I think that's very important to kind of creating like change in this, because obviously like this depends person to person, but colorism is something that's still fairly prevalent in like the South Asian diaspora, even in the West. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about colorism. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm just gonna move on to domestic violence then. So this like is a statistic that I think I've definitely heard before, right? It's that like India has a very low divorce rate, less than 1%. And it's something that like whenever I've seen it, like kind of like whenever I've seen people talk about it, it's mainly like championed as this sort of like empirical proof that like Indian marriages or even really like South Asian marriages in general are something that we should be learning from or, trying to like emulate. And I think whenever like I see that, my first thought is like, I think of this statistic, which is a lot less talked about, and I don't think a lot of people even know it. But it's like 70% of South Asian women in the West have actually experienced domestic violence or DV, and then intimate partner violence or IPV. And to put that into context, it means that like if you just kind of took 10 South Asian women, seven of them would have experienced some sort of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And I think, you really have to consider, right? Like, why is that? And more specifically, like, why does it seem like so many South Asian women are like willingly staying in marriages where they are being hurt? And so I think the first thing is that like Fordham University faculty, Tripathi and Azar explained that it's kind of this overall value placed on rigid gender roles that leads to higher rates of domestic violence. The culture, like kind of like a lot of South Asian cultures tend to favor men, right? They see them as like this intellectually superior breadwinners who are capable of sustaining the family, compared to women who are typically painted as the intellectually inferior, kind of like caregivers. Um, and the reason why like these beliefs are still kind of present, even in like the West, right, is because many South Asian immigrants, they tend to see them as like part of their culture, right? And something that they need to hold on to, kind of in the same way that they would like hold on to like their heritage. Right? Losing these beliefs would mean like losing their roots. And as a result, women's health is kind of little importance. And many women actually like arrive into Western countries with like no financial prospects. And it leads to a lot of them being legally, financially, and socially dependent on their husbands. So it's really important to remember that like while, to us it might seem kind of clear cut, like, with divorce being like a next step, right, with kind of abuse, it really is not an option for a lot of South Asian women. Because there's also such like let's just say like even if these women become self-reliant, because a lot of them do tend to have like legal and financial dependencies, especially in terms of like immigration and visas to their husbands. Even if these women become self-reliant, it's really hard to reach out and leave because there's a very deep stigma against like divorce, and societally kind of the institution of marriage and family is considered very sacred. So like I guess the idea, right, is that the person who breaks a sacred institution is like the social pariah and is someone who is like quote unquote morally corrupt. And that blame will almost always go to the woman, regardless of what her husband has done. There's also kind of more like tangible like lack of support that South Asian women face. So like for example, a study from Korean and Prakayasta finds that Asian American, like if we look at the term Asian Americans and like kind of specifically Asian American support groups, South Asian Americans don't really fit in that, like in America, right? The term kind of like even in America, really even the term like Asian American doesn't always refer to people who are South Asian. Um, and there's also kind of separate cultural spheres. So even though there might be a prevalence of kind of Asian American domestic violence support groups, those aren't always able to support South Asian like women when they kind of need more cultural sensitive support. So like another kind of thing is that there's like a lot like traditional domestic violence kind of support centers might not always help because they're not like culturally competent, and sometimes that can lead to an addition like more feelings of shame and doubt for the victims, right, because South Asian women are already reluctant to call the police or seek legal help, because those are kind of seen as like sense of like shame in the South Asian community, and they already tend to underutilize American social service institutions. So if they go to like traditional domestic violence centers, and like for example, if there's some culturally specific practices like dowry, that they feel shamed for, they might just kind of not go through that like idea because they feel like they're being shamed for participating in what we might consider like archaic traditions. The other thing is that public like assistance facilities aren't really able to help South Asian victims because um, a lot of them like they don't a lot of them don't have South Asian like language support. Like for example, Nevada, we don't have like any language support for any South Asian culture, despite the fact that like the domestic violence like South Asian women make up a lot of the domestic violence victim population. But like I think I looked at two of the largest like domestic violence support groups, and they didn't have like a single South Asian language kind of support offered. And that's really difficult because like obviously a lot of these women, especially if they're immigrants, they tend to speak their native language better. And some of them might only speak their language, like their native language. And so in that time that it takes to even like get a translator, it can just be too long almost. Um, so what can we do? So I think for something like this, I would say that um like it is something that's very serious, right? And if you do end up deciding to like undertake helping victims of domestic violence, even if they're like South Asian or not, I do think it's really like important to understand that it's a really big undertaking. Like a lot of times there is a foreseeable risk that a lot of these women who choose to come forward like are aware about, and if they do take it, they are quite literally like kind of entrusting you or like the organization you're with their lives. So that's definitely something to consider, that it's like it's very very like important that when you like are talking about like organizations offering domestic violence support, it's also very hard because it's a very high impact. But again, that doesn't mean you can't make a like impactful difference on a smaller scale. The first thing I would say is like, if you are South Asian, or if you just like know like if you're really involved in the South Asian community, you can ensure that like kind of the comments that are like the reason why a lot of women feel stuck in these marriages, right? Why they like feel kind of ashamed to go through the divorce route and reach out for help. You can ensure that those comments are not, and instead offer more like uplifting or supportive comments. And obviously, to go back to my previous point, if you do want to take a larger role in solving the issue, you can reach out to your like local South Asian women organization. Like a lot of literature and research that's shown that like South Asian women organizations, or SAWOs, can be very effective, through intervention for getting DV and IPV victims to report their abusers and to be placed in safer houses. It is important to remember that a lot of them are grassroots organizations, and they don't really have a funding, and a lot of them like have a shoestring volunteer workforce. So that's definitely something like to consider, but like there are a lot of avenues you can use to help. So thanks so much for being here tonight. I don't know if we have time, but this was just sort of like a question I'll say to think about, right? Is that obviously these are just two issues, they're not the whole thing. And so definitely like you can think about like what conversations is a South Asian community still afraid to have, and how can we start having them?
Thank you so much, Simmer. That was so amazing. I appreciate it a lot. This was a great session. We're so excited to start in our next one in a couple minutes. Thank you again. Okay. Let me stop recording really quick.